So today we're talking about breaking the spell that inside of us says, I just don't want to get in trouble. And I really started thinking about this a few months ago when you're having a conversation with someone and you're sort of talking about something and it's reasonable and it's logical and we're having an honest conversation, and then all of a sudden something is said like, well, I just don't want to upset them. Well, I just don't want to get in trouble about this. It's not worth it. No, it's just not worth it. And it seemed to circumvent the conversation. Like it just sort of came out of nowhere. It was just some strange mantra that just got inserted that ended all of that interesting conversation. We did a talk a while ago, and the spell was, well, I'm not good enough. These weird mantras that somewhere got planted inside of us. And no matter what we want to achieve, or no matter what we want to accomplish, or the steps we want to take on our soul's path, these sayings got in our head like a spell. And that as soon as we kind of get close to a breakthrough, this thing comes in and ends it. And that's really interesting to me. And that's why this is called The Spells We're Under. And this one particularly is certainly one that I have lived with and probably still live with a little bit or a lot, I don't know. This is the challenge with spells, is they get in and then we internalize them and we integrate them and we think they're us. We don't recognize them as being something from other or something that really is in the way of our soul's path. And that's why it's very interesting to talk about. Because sometimes all we have to do is see it. There was a great teacher, Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and he used to talk about the observer and the observed and how they were actually the same thing. And he specifically talked about it in terms of consciousness, that when we are the observer and we observe something that is going on inside of us, there's a reciprocal relationship between the observer and the observed, so that as soon as we actually see what's inside of us, it changes. So the very act of becoming conscious of a spell that's inside of us changes it. It's almost like that's the key. We just have to see it. And then once we see it, it doesn't seem to control us anymore. Like that's the whole piece, right? It's very interesting. So why do I want to talk about this? Because when we're afraid to get in trouble, we often will change our own soul's path. Instead of walking in our truth, making choices in our truth, our path gets subverted and we start living someone else's path. We start living a life that makes other people happy, makes other souls happy, that somehow maybe aligns with that person's incarnation or the fears of that person over there or the judgment of that person over there. But this soul has a path to take. And we know that we're off path because we have so much inner dissonance. We have so much inner struggle. We have so many inner arguments. Because we know that we're off path. When we are walking in our truth, when we are doing things that we know that for some reason this is what I'm supposed to be, there may be challenges outside of us, but they're not inside. Inside, we're quiet. Inside, we know I don't know why I'm on this path, but I am. And even if other people don't like it, that's okay, because this is my path. You're not supposed to understand my path. I don't even understand my path. This is the adventure I signed up for. So I can't explain it to you either because, my life is always in motion. I don't really get it, right? So that's where it's always interesting when we've internalized a spell like this. We've internalized the idea that no matter what, I don't want to get in trouble, right? What's really interesting about this one, too, actually, all the spells, when we kind of let them go, is once we've seen them, once we've had that observed experience inside and we see it and we go, hey, that's not right. It's so weird walking through our life after, because then suddenly we see it everywhere. We see all the places that we once would have changed our behavior or not spoken our truth or not been honest or not done whatever we had to do to stay in alignment with our soul. And then we see the people around us still trying to kind of manipulate us because they know that we're afraid to get in trouble. So all they have to do is just say this one thing or pull a cold shoulder or threaten something, and we would just cave. And then we watch them doing it. And because we're not under that spell anymore, we just sort of look at them like, what are you doing? It's so funny. So where are some of these places that shows up? So for example, imagine, I remember when I was married, I remember this over and over again, the thought going through my mind, why, I don't want to upset him. I'm afraid what he might think. And my husband was a really lovely man. And I mean, he had his issues like we all do, but he would never have hurt me. He would never have done anything that actually threatened me in any way. And I remember even while I was married thinking, why do you use the words, I'm afraid of what he might think. I'm afraid of what he might do. And not, because again, he would never have harmed me physically, verbally, emotionally, nothing. And yet, this was in me. And I remember at the time thinking, this doesn't make any sense. Where did this come from? Where did this line come from? And the crazy thing is, at the time, even though I could see it, it still controlled me. It still kept me from being honest. It still kept me from standing in my truth. Because that fear of upsetting him, that fear of getting in trouble by my husband. And this is the other really weird thing about this. And one of the reasons that these spells cause an imbalance is that he was my lover. We were the same age. Why is he above me? Like, is this some old, weird leftover from the patriarchy that your husband owns you and your husband gets to tell you what to do, or something like that? Like, because I took his last name or something? Like, he's now allowed to judge me and he's allowed to tell me what I should be doing and not, like. And again, he just wasn't even like that. It was all inside of me. Like, it wasn't him. And that's really interesting. Right? Like, why did this imbalance happen? Because we're the same. All of us here. We're all just like 7-year-olds sitting in a sandbox playing together. Everybody, all 7.5 billion people on the planet right now. We're all just humans hanging out. Nobody has the right to make someone feel like they're in trouble. Right? There is none of this. We're all like this. So that's weird. Where did this imbalance come from in my relationships? And it continued. It was crazy. Like, I remember even after we divorced and I would go out with other people, I would watch this weird dynamic that said, oh no, it matters to him. Don't upset him. Don't make him don't rock the boat. Don't do this. And I thought I would watch myself going, what are you doing? What is wrong with you? And if, you have little victories through the whole thing, right? It's not like black or white or anything. Because every so often you think, okay, wait a minute. I'm afraid that he's going to get upset. So I'm the only one that should be upset? That doesn't make any sense. But I hadn't broken the spell. I was looking at it, but it still controlled me. It's fascinating. And then, we go outside of intimate relationships and we even look at friends, colleagues, bosses, parents, children, whatever. And sometimes the spell sounds like, yeah, well, they might get mad at me. Or they might not invite me anymore. Or what if they don't like me anymore? Or what if they think I'm wrong? What if, and we have all these weird things and we think, well, if they think you're wrong, it's because they have a different perspective. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means they don't see it from your perspective. This should not control us, right? And I think the greatest reason I want to talk about this is because this imbalance can set our soul on a completely wrong trajectory. When we know that we have full choice, that whatever this incarnation, whoever I am whatever I'm meant to be doing, I'm meant to do it. And I'm meant to make choices along the way and, ponder things and listen within and all these great things. But as soon as I change my path, because I'm afraid of getting in trouble, as a 52-year-old woman, like you kind of go, what are you talking about? That's when we really have to look at this. So then the question becomes, where did this come from? Why does it have this, blind power over us? Why does it seem to be inside of us? And it seems that we can't break out of it. What is that, right? Well, when you look at our upbringing, and again, realize there are people in the world who this spell never worked on. This isn't for them. There are people who fought against authority from the time they had a diaper on them. But I doubt that they're listening to our talk today. So understand that this isn't everybody. But for lots of us, our social conditioning as children definitely implanted this in us. When you look at, and it could go beyond that. It could go into karma and ancestral patterns and DNA programming. It could be so deep. It could be all the conditioning of our forefathers as well. But just to keep it simple, let's just keep it in our own life. Sometimes I just talk a lot. I need water. So you imagine when we're children and we do something and we get in trouble. When I was young, it was still kind of spare the rod, spoil the child mentality. It was kind of just coming out of that. It was probably when I was in my early teens that spanking was no longer allowed, or it was starting to be poo-pooed. Before that, it wasn't really. That was a good household, right? So if you imagine you step out of line, out of whatever line your parents had set or whoever was raising you, and you got hit. Like you got physically hit, or you were grounded, or you were put in your room, or you weren't given dinner, or whatever. Like this is serious psychological behavioral conditioning. Like it's not spiritual or interesting. That's just how it goes, right? And so then even once they stopped corporal punishment, I mean, in my family, guilt trips were a really big thing. Like, you could do what you want, but we're going to be really disappointed, like, Like there's, you know, guilt is a huge thing because, and I mean, it's not all evil. Sometimes parents just simply want you to take a certain path because any other path seems really scary for them and for you, and they want the best for you. Somehow they want to put you back on a path that feels comfortable for them. So we can't hit people, but we can guilt them and we can take away their whatever. This is early training. Like this happens from the time we're probably 2 years old and we have our first, bout of terrible twos and we scream and yell because we didn't get our way. We're very impressionable at 2 years old. And we learn very quickly that don't get in trouble or you're going to lose that. And this becomes our reality. And it happens over and over and over and over again until we just learn. We probably get to a point where we learn how to be more sneaky. But the key is to not get in trouble. So now we lie and we go around them and we do whatever we have to do to get around them. But the spell is still there because the key is do not get in trouble. Do not get caught, right? It may not alter our behavior, but that's still inside of us. Then we go to school. And school's really weird. School's weirder than our upbringing at home because it's actually even more disciplined, right? That you sit. When you're sitting in class, you only have one option. You sit. If you fidget, if you talk, if you move, you're in trouble. There is nothing else. There's no other. There's no other. And if you don't do the assignment, you fail. If you're bad, you get sent to the principal's office. And again, when I was young, you were still strapped. Again, back to the corporal punishment thing. And if the bell rang, everyone has to get up. You don't have an option. You don't say, yeah, I'm not really feeling it. I'm just going to stay in my desk. It's like everyone gets up. Everyone gets in line. Everyone does this thing. Can you step out of line? No. And I'm not criticizing the education system. What I'm saying is, from a very young age, some of us started school when we were 3 years old, 4 years old. We learned that we cannot get in trouble. Period. You cannot say no. That person has power over you. You cannot do this. This is such strong training from age 3, 4 on. And this is why when we look at that, you look at, they tell stories of, and I don't like talking about animals, but, all you have to do is put like a really strong rope on an animal when they're very, very young. And by the time they're big, and maybe a ton, weighing a ton, you can control them with just a simple halter. Because from such a young age, they believed there was no option. Right? This is the power of this spell. I have no option. I have no option. And that was repeated in every second of our day, especially while we were at school, from age 4 till 18, 14 years of knowing that we had no option. And this is fascinating. It's just fascinating to look at that and say, well, no wonder. No wonder I'm afraid of getting in trouble. No wonder I'm afraid of rocking the boat. Right? So just to look at that, and then we go to work. Maybe my first job, I was 12 years old and I was scooping ice cream at an ice cream parlor. Are you allowed to get in trouble there? No. Are you allowed to, no, here are the rules. This is what you do, period. Or you don't get paid, or you lose your job, or whatever. And then as life gets bigger, and now we have mortgages and families and responsibilities, we definitely can't get in trouble. So you kind of see where I'm going with this, right? That it's so deeply inside of us that why would we ever question it? So of course, all of these things make sense, right? I mean, it makes sense that, if you work for someone, you need to do what your boss asks you. That's why you were hired. And there's a lot of times in school that it's really good to do the homework because that's why you're there. Like, it isn't that these things are wrong, right? The problem is when we've internalized this system that says we cannot rock the boat in all the places in our life that we should have freedom, we don't. And that's the danger. Because as a human being, in many, many ways, we are actually a whole. We are a whole being. We don't actually compartmentalize as much as we think we do. We aren't actually, oh, well, I just do as I'm told at work. But in my own life, I totally do my own thing. Or, oh, yeah, well, in relationships, I'm a little bit like that. But on a soul's path, I totally have choice. That's not really how humans work. The reality is, if we've internalized this idea, then we probably have internalized it in our own soul's journey as well. And that is the danger, right? Me, in many, many ways, I've been told, I remember one time a friend of mine said, why do you just rebel against everything? But the funny thing is, there's a lot of weird things I've done in my life that seem rebellious, but to me, they seem on my soul. They just feel like they're on my soul's path. Like going to nudist resorts or going on a naked cruise with my husband with 3,500 other naturists, right? This might seem kind of rebellious, but to me, I don't know, it felt like the right thing to do. Because the truth is, I do like following rules. I like order in society. I do like it. It's not that. But because of that, because I do like to follow rules and I do have this weird spell that says I can't get in trouble, there are lots of things on my soul's journey that I haven't done. And in relationships, I have struggled to speak my truth because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to upset anybody. And that's why this is important. I'm not saying don't do your job or don't do your homework, or I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we have to really look at how much of this we've internalized and then ask ourselves, is that why I'm not speaking up? Is that why I'm not sticking my neck out and really being me? Is that why? Because if so, I'm not in school anymore. And I actually need to not do that in my life. I need to actually have the freedom to walk in my truth, right? What's really interesting too is as we've all experienced these things. We've all experienced being in school and one person's the teacher and one person's a student, or one person's the parent and one person's the child, or whatever. And what's really weird is that as we walk through life, the people in our lives take on all these different roles. Sometimes we put them in those roles. Sometimes if I'm afraid of getting in trouble, whether you're actually going to get me in trouble or not, I'm going to put you in that role anyway because that's what the spell tells me to do, right? So whether you do it or not, I'm going to put you there. But some people actually really do take the role of punisher. Obviously, these are not the people I'm talking about here in our gathering, but they actually take that role. They know that, wow, people are really easily manipulated. So all I have to do is threaten them and they're just going to do what they're told. Awesome. Do I feel powerful, right? So all of a sudden in relationships, they can threaten and they can cold shoulder and they can do all these things and they're going to punish you. And if they're doing it, it means it works, right? We don't do things multiple times if it doesn't work. And if they keep doing it and they keep doing it, they start to realize, wow, life is awesome this way. And they become that boss that threatens and punishes. And they become that partner. And that child, I've seen children punish their parents. And I mean, from the age of 4 to the age of 64, right? The, the punishing thing, that becomes a weird power. So now all of a sudden, we have this weird dynamic in the world where there are people actually taking the punishing role. There are people taking the punished role. There are people envisioning it. Like, this is a really common drama that plays out in many, many aspects of our lives. I mean, this is literally, they could be mean girls in high school, shunning the one over there. Like, this is a huge thing. It's a huge part of our world, which is, again, why I think sometimes it's hard to see the spell, right? It's hard to see that, wait a minute, this isn't right, because we're so surrounded by it, right? We've experienced it in too many different ways. So we start to think, we don't even know it's there, to be honest. And it just sort of controls us from underneath, right? So now let's imagine we've seen the spell. We know it exists. We realize that, wow, I'm afraid to get in trouble. And I'm changing how I act. I'm not speaking up. I'm not honoring my truth. And again, this could be at work, romantic relationships, family, friends, colleagues, groups you belong to, whatever, right? You realize this and you go, okay. So what happens is, in this shift, when we realize it, what happens is suddenly we go, so I have choice then. I'm no longer bound by this fear. So you can be mad at me if you want. That's okay. You can think I'm wrong, as I hope you do, because you're a different person than I am. That's awesome. And it leaves me in a place of pure choice. And if I speak my truth, I speak my truth. And if you don't like it, that's okay. And I'm not talking about speaking my truth like being angry or mean or anything like that. But my truth matters, and I'm no longer going to hold it back because I'm afraid of, what you might think, or you getting mad at me or punishing me or something like that. So then what happens? What happens once we have this realization? Well, we have a lot of adaptations that we've taken on because of this spell, because of this fear. And one of them is passive aggressiveness. When we are afraid of other people punishing us, our soul still wants to make choices. Our soul still wants to have power. So it's very easy for us to become passive aggressive. It's very easy for us to become sarcastic, or try to get our way around the corner, or, do this kind of thing. So all of a sudden, we don't need passive aggression anymore. We can just be honest. We don't need to come around from the backside. We don't need to plant a seed. We don't need to do any of those things. We can just be honest. There's no need for sarcasm. There's no need for anything. Suddenly and it's also really interesting, because if someone comes at us with passive aggression, it doesn't make any sense. They're sort of talking over here, kind of fishing for you to hook into something, or to ask you a question or something like that, or ask them a question. And you kind of are just looking at them going, do you have a question? I don't know why you're saying all this stuff. Like, I need you to say something that we can talk about. So it's really obvious once we see it, especially once we see it in ourselves. The other thing that becomes really easier is communication. Because imagine you're sitting in front of someone, could be a boss, romantic partner, child, parent, anybody. And you're sitting in front of them, and in a previous state, you're afraid of getting in trouble. You're afraid of upsetting them. You're afraid of what they might think. So you need to say something because whatever's going on really doesn't work for you. Maybe it's hurtful. Maybe you just don't like it. If the spell is still present, you've got to somehow talk around it. You've got to somehow say it in a way that you don't get in trouble, right? It's kind of like, the teenager coming home and they crash the car or something happened and you're like, what happened? And they tell you enough that they can't get in trouble for, so you totally know that they're not telling you the whole story because those pieces don't fit together. So what's really going on? So that's the previous way. But then all of a sudden, if you're not afraid of the other person getting you in trouble, or you just tell them, you say, this is how I feel right now. This is what's going through my mind. This is what I'm struggling with. And you just say it. Right? And then whatever they do or they don't do, if they try the punishing thing, because maybe that's your dynamic, and they give you the cold shoulder, or they withdraw, or maybe they get angry, or they withhold sex, or they withhold whatever, well, that's okay. The dust will settle and we'll make another choice later. We're all adults here. It's weird. It's like, again, we kind of all become adults again. There's no, I'm not 12. Like, you're not gonna, you can't just rage around and I'm gonna change my behavior. Like, it's so strangely apparent once it's apparent, right? You imagine in career, let's say you work for a company or you work for someone, and up until this point, there's been certain things that you really struggled with. Maybe things going on in the company, things, ethical things, whatever. Or even in your own role, maybe you don't really like the role you're in, but you don't want to rock the boat, so you just suffer every day. Like, this is our life. This is us alive, breathing, soul incarnate on earth. Why do we do things that we maybe could make a choice about? So if you're not afraid of getting in trouble, and again, this sort of asks us to get out of a lot of different fears. Like, it asks us to have a lot of faith that everything will be okay too, right? There's a whole discussion about how to get out of fears in general, but then all of a sudden, maybe you have the opportunity to talk to your boss or one of your colleagues and say, I had some ideas about this. And maybe they don't like it or they freak out or whatever, and maybe, I don't know. But that's okay, because this is just how I see it. It's a whole different world. It's a whole different world. I was watching the movie about David Bohm last night for like the probably 6th time with my daughter, called Infinite Potential. And they were talking about, David Bohm was a quantum physicist that I'm quite taken with. He passed back in 1992, so it's not that kind of taken with, but he rolls around in my consciousness a lot. And one of the things that was really interesting to him was something, and this got him in a lot of trouble, because it was during the Second World War, and so he was deemed a communist, which he wasn't. He just was very intrigued with some of the ideas about communism. And so there's a very famous experiment called the Russian experiment. And in this, the idea was that when we all work together, we have this idea that we all have to be the same. We all have to become sort of a monoculture or a mono thought or a mono this in order to get along. And what the Russian experiment, why it was interesting to David Bohm, was because, again, one of his, as much as he was a quantum physicist, one of his his primary desires was to help humanity. And so he actually did a lot of work around dialogue and communication and even changing our language and consciousness and all kinds of things. And he wrote one of the number one books on quantum theory. Like, I mean, it's not like he couldn't do the math or something, but how it applied to humanity was very, very interesting to him. So within this Russian experiment, what they found was the more you actually completely engage in the society, the more freedom you have as a soul, which seems like such a paradox. It seems so counterintuitive to this idea that we're talking about, that no, 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 I don't want to rock the boat. No, 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 I don't want anyone to think that I'm different. I don't want to get in trouble by shunning or by punishment or whatever. I don't want to do that because I want to be part of. And this was one of the big things that he was so interested in, that it actually seemed like the opposite is true. The more we are ourselves, the more we fit in. The more unique we are, the more the stronger the collective is, which seems very opposite. He went into this whole way of understanding it through charged plasma and physics and stuff, which is a whole other thing that kind of blows my mind. But the human relevance is, it's really healthy for us to live our unique soul's path, which again is why it's so valuable to release these spells that take us off of that uniqueness. And the last thing I want to mention is, when we come to this place, when we come to this new understanding, this new way of seeing, we stop getting ourselves in trouble. Forget about other people. Forget about, we often play these dramas out in the world with others, right? I don't want that person to be mad at me. I don't want to get in trouble with that person. I'm afraid what that person will think of me. But there's another part of it, and it's the judge and jury inside of us, right? That's what we're really afraid of. It's our own inner judge that says, really? Are you kidding? Or tells us that, that's not a good idea. We can't do this, And of course, as soon as we have this inner judge, we have this inner punisher. Like, I read this book once called, what was it called? How to Tame Your Gremlins or something. And it was all about how inside your brain, you had this board of directors of personalities. And these board of directors would criticize or support every choice we made. And in this book, they presented them as gremlins. And one personality might be like, yeah, you can do it. And another personality might be, are you kidding? Or another personality like, see, you did this before. Like, it's almost like all the fears and guilt and shame and all that stuff, they're all living in there inside of us. We don't need other people to do it. We just do it to ourselves. And one of my big ones personally was this commandant, right? That was like, you've got to be faster. You've got to do better. You can't, this commandant that just tortured me, right? That was the person I was afraid to get in trouble with. He might have shown up outside in the world of partners or bosses or whoever, or just the general public or whoever they are that we're so afraid of. But when I reconciled with that guy, I stopped seeing him out in the world, right? So when we come to this place, it's the inner battle that really goes away. Because when we have an inner battle, we are exhausted all the time. We lay awake at night arguing with ourselves, arguing with this board of directors in our minds, redoing conversations, thinking we should have been able to do it better, and all these things. And the worst thing is, inside we get stuck. Inside we come to the decision that I have no choice. I can't make a choice here. I'm stuck. And then where does that leave us? Right? We're kind of in our own prison. Inside. We may pull in other people to play roles, but it's all inside. Because once we change, they stop showing up. And if they do show up, we just sort of look at them like, what are you doing? I don't know why you're talking like this. Why don't we just have a conversation? Right? We're all equals here. So it's a fascinating thing to let this spell go. And just know that there's no such thing as getting in trouble. It doesn't actually exist, especially on a soul level. And then it doesn't exist in our social life either, or in our romantic lives or anything. It's about claiming our sovereignty. Sovereignty is so interesting. It's like sovereignty I see as a true connection between our own seventh chakra and our first chakra. I don't see it as outside. I see it as that I have a higher purpose. This is my connection to the infinite. This is what we talk about in yoga and spiritual things, right? Our connection. And then here is how I listen. Here is how I share it. And here is how I manifest it. That's sovereignty to me. So the idea of someone coming along and saying, no, we're going to cut off your connection to your divine source of guidance, that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand. And don't get me wrong, I've had more than a few spells about this, but really, really interesting. How to balance our energy while standing up for myself. I find it draining. You know what I love? I love Gandhi's perspective of satyagraha. And satya meaning truth. And this is like seventh chakra truth, like truth right through our being. And graha meaning to stand in that truth. What allows it to not be exhausting is that we're not fighting for our truth. We're standing in our truth. And this is this vertical alignment between our two sources. Our source on the earth. We are incarnate on this earth. And our source, and it sounds so much more woo-woo than I normally speak, but this is really truly how I feel the world and how I feel satyagraha, is that when I am not in this alignment, I'm exhausted. Because if I'm like all over the place and I'm running around doing circles around other people trying to make everybody happy, I'm exhausted. But when I stand still, this is why when we meditate, we sit in this beautiful upright posture. We practice this alignment from the crown right down to our manifested self. This is truth, right? That's like the number one best reason to sit upright in meditation, because that's what we're practicing. And to practice satyagraha, I'm not saying it's never exhausting, but it's almost like this is us plugged into the proper channels. And then there's no inner battle, right? How did you find yourself amidst the voice that says, I don't have a choice? I think the biggest change for me came when I realized that I didn't have to be in a relationship. Because before that, I felt like I had to be in this relationship. I believed in that marriage was till death do you part. I believed that I had a lot of pride around being married. I believed that I wasn't lovable if I couldn't make this work. And once all those things passed, and I say that lightly, we all know that those are like a lot of dark nights of the soul right there. And then you realize that I'm not bound to this relationship. And then suddenly that meant I had choice. And it meant that speaking my truth was important because we were in relationship. We were two souls in relationship. And that meant he had important things to share. I had important things to share. And between this, we were having an actual relationship. We were relating. If one person isn't sharing, we're not in a relationship. So suddenly, the only way to be in a relationship was to share my truth. And if in the end that wasn't okay with him, and he didn't want to be relating with me as a soul, then we weren't meant to be relating any longer. And that was very, very counter what I wanted to believe in my heart. But today, I can't imagine believing anything else. So, how to deal with old patterns like family of origin. You know what's really interesting about family of origin patterns is that I've had more than a few people be told by psychics that they were, what was the phrase? Bloodline cleaners? Something like that. That because they feel such a pushback against the bloodlines of their family of origin, that it's actually their purpose. That they're actually meant to end these spells now. They're meant to end these ancestral patterns and begin something new, and there's real power in that. It's more than just being oblivious or unaffected by the ancestral patterns. To actually look at them, own them, and then close that chapter is very powerful. So if we find ourselves in that position, that we don't have to demonize them, we don't have to criticize them, punish them, do anything like that. We simply have to look at them, understand the contrast, and say, this isn't of any help any longer. There might have been a time in the past where this was very important to the survival of the clan, but this book is closed now. We're going to walk forward, in choice. We're going to walk forward in something different. So it's a very interesting thing, because that's what many, many people are dealing with, right? Not like our family of origin, the ancestral DNA, the thoughts and beliefs of our parents, our grandparents, our tribes. And we have such a different consciousness today. We have so much more power to hold this beautiful witness mind and observe it in kindness and in love and in acceptance, and then say, I so am thankful for how you've served in the past. But it's time to let this training go now. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have an awesome day, and we'll see you soon.